Okay, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. We have all time zones here around the globe, and welcome everyone to the APRU Asia Pacific Women in Leadership Mentoring Program Workshop, Exploring Leadership and Influence on International Women's Day. And of course, happy International Women's Day to everyone. My name is Sabrina Lin. I'm Senior Advisor to the President at the Hong Kong University of Science and Technology and the Women in Leadership co-chair. We're very excited to gather here today on International Women's Day to discuss women's leadership and influence. And it's really important for us to all hear different perspectives and stories from women leaders. And we really look forward to what we will be learning from our distinguished speakers today. We're also very excited to have some space and breakout sessions for conversations amongst all the workshop participants that will help foster community and additional learning. And we all know that women succeed, everyone succeeds with networks of support, and that is the driving force of the Women in Leadership program. Today's agenda includes talks from 3 different women leaders, and as well as a facilitated breakout room discussion where participants will reflect on what they've heard and apply it to a specific scenario, as well as a group discussion to share out from those breakout rooms. Now I'd like to introduce our moderator for today's workshop, Dr. Darrelli Matteo Babiano. Dr. Matteo Babiano is Associate Professor and Assistant Dean Diversity and Inclusion at the Melbourne School of Design at the University of Melbourne. She's passionate about deepening inequalities that are inherently attached to transport and public space, particularly for women and girls. And she has convened the Women in Transport Leadership Knowledge Network. She's also a member of the award-winning Place Agency and delivered several placemaking workshops leading to productive collaboration to advance real solutions and opportunities for positive place-based change. Over to you, Darrelli.
Thank you very much, Sabrina. So before we move on, let's take a quick group photo. Chelsea is going to take a series of screenshots. So please turn on your camera, sit up straight, and smile. Okay, thank you very much, Chelsea. So I'm delighted to welcome you all to this workshop on International Women's Day. The 2022 IWD theme is Gender Equality Towards Today for a Sustainable Tomorrow. We acknowledge the important role that women and girls play in creating our shared pathway to shaping a more gender equal world. And we acknowledge that despite the mammoth task of addressing some of the greatest global threats of our time, climate change, environmental disasters, and the COVID-19 pandemic. So the pandemic lockdown made us more reflective on who we are, where is our place in the community. And it also made us realize how connected we are, even from afar, as we relied heavily on our circle of trusted friends and family. While we listen to our shared frustrations on the COVID impacts, we also have been inspired by the stories of the spontaneity of support from our community. So today I'm very pleased to be in the company of many wonderful women change makers from different parts of the world. And I'm very honored to welcome a distinguished panel of 3 inspiring women talk about exploring leadership and influence, which is our theme for this workshop. Each one of them will share their story of how they played a part in a moment of change, inspiring us of how they made impact and fostered change to leadership, the skills that were most useful to them, and the lessons that they have learned in this journey. We hope that you will take some learnings and inspirations away from the stories that our speakers are going to tell. So our first speaker is Professor Karima Bennoune. So Professor Binon holds the Homer G. Angelo and Berryhill Endowed Chair in International Law, and is also a Martin Luther King Jr. Professor of Law at the University of California, Davis School of Law in the United States. She served as a United Nations Special Rapporteur in the field of cultural rights from 2015 to 2021. She was a visiting professor at the University of Michigan Law School during the academic year 2021 to 2022. In 2017, she served as an expert in the reparations phase of the groundbreaking Al-Mahdi case before the International Criminal Court concerning international destruction of cultural heritage in Mali. A former legal advisor for Amnesty International, she has carried out human rights missions in most regions of the world. Without further ado, I would like to call on Professor Bennoune to please share her story.
Thank you so much for that very kind introduction and my warm greetings. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all of you. I'd like to thank the APRU Asia Pacific Women in Leadership for organizing this wonderful event and for inviting me to take place. I have to say I'm very honored to be with all of you. It's such a nice way to mark International Women's Day. And I feel that really in view of the current events in the world, from the pandemic to the current awful armed conflict in Ukraine, it is a really vital time for women to build and strengthen global connections that can help us make the positive changes that we need so desperately in our world. So again, really wonderful to be with you today. I send my greetings for International Women's Day, and sadly, I have to say I cannot wish us a happy Women's Day in the view of the terrible events that we're witnessing in the world. But I wish us all a day of strength and unity when we recommit to transforming our world into a world of human rights, of equality, and peace for all. It's interesting to look at the history of International Women's Day, which was first officially celebrated in 1911. So this year, it's actually the 111th Women's Day. Things were made official about this event in 1975 when the UN started marking the occasion. According to the BBC, the choice of the March 8th date reflects the start of a wartime strike in 1917 during World War I, when Russian women demanded bread and peace, which is a very important history, I think, to remember today. Now, one of the UN themes for IWD 2022 was mentioned by our moderator, but another is to provide a platform to help forge positive change for women. And that seems to be a very relevant theme for our event. I hope we will add an additional specific theme and an additional specific kind of positive change that we would all like to work for, which is an immediate end to the war in Ukraine, which is having such a terrible effect on so many women who are among the killed and the wounded. And I have to say, against such a backdrop, I feel a bit humble about speaking about my own work to create and contribute to change. But that is the task that I have been given, and I'm pleased to have a chance to reflect a bit on my own experience and then to hear the experiences and lessons of others. So when I thought about what I wanted to address today, I realized that I wanted to talk about how I tried as a human rights lawyer, as a person, as a woman human rights defender, how I tried to react to conflict violence that affected my own family and to try to change the responses to similar violence in other parts of the world. So you may be surprised to hear this with my accent, but my late father, Mahfoud Bennoune, was from the North African country of Algeria, and I in part grew up there. He was an anthropologist and he risked his life throughout the violence in his country in the 1990s that was carried out by extremist armed groups in particular that were sort of the precursor to the so-called Islamic State or Daesh of today. And that violence killed as many as 200,000 people. And what I'll never forget about my father is that he refused to be silent. He refused to leave the country despite death threats. He repeatedly denounced terrorism and extremist ideas in print, signing his name in the local newspapers. And for 4 years, every time he went out, we didn't know, he didn't know if he was going to come home again. But even though we couldn't be in the country with him, the sort of amazing example that he set for me was the example of always speaking out. And he would have been the first to say, he was one of thousands of Algerians who did this, including so many women and women human rights defenders. And so many people continue to do that peaceful work against extremism today, thousands of them around the world in places like Afghanistan, but they don't get significant international media coverage, even when they pay with their lives. They are too often forgotten by the world. So what I wanted to try to do back in 2010, learning from my family's experience, learning from the example of my father, was to try to tell the stories of people like him, challenging extremism peacefully, armed only with their voices and their pens. And so I traveled around the world and interviewed about 300 people of Muslim heritage from Afghanistan to Mali in 30 different countries about their experiences doing this kind of work. And I wrote a book called Your Fatwa Does Not Apply Here to try to share these stories. My hope was that readers would take this trip with me and the stories would come to have meaning for them. And I dreamed that they would recognize that this fight, this peaceful fight by people of Muslim heritage against extremism, was one of the most important human rights struggles in the world, and that they would never again generalize about or stereotype Muslims. And I think today on International Women's Day, or here where I am as we approach International Women's Day, about the stories of some of those I interviewed. I interviewed women in Algeria who used to go to the site of terrorist attacks and fill the bomb craters with flowers, even when they were risking their lives to do that, and the police would say, "We can't protect you." I interviewed Maria Bashir, the first woman chief prosecutor in Afghanistan, who had to have 23 bodyguards at the time that I interviewed her because of the threats to her life. She is sadly today a refugee. I'd like to think that through this work, I made a small contribution, and I think we always have to be very modest about our claims around change, a small contribution to change, to trying to get people to recognize extremism as a human rights question, not just a security question, and recognize the vital role of so many Muslims and people of Muslim heritage in challenging it. And eventually I got to go on CNN and MSNBC and share these stories. And the TED Talk about the book was viewed about 1.5 million times. And I never realized how much that was going to mean to the people whose stories are in the book. So let me just conclude quickly by saying the skills that I think were important in this and the lessons I learned. The skills that ended up being essential to me in doing this work were the ability to work through networks. You never do this work by yourself, to build trust and confidence so that people will share their stories with you. It was absolutely essential to do that. The understanding, and this is something I really learned doing this, that you should never try to speak for people, but instead try to amplify their voices. And a willingness to learn from what I call the university of the world. So not to approach the world with your preconceived notions, but to actually be open to the complexity that you discover and to reflect that in the way that you write. And most of all, I came to understand that you never make any change by yourself, but by working with others. And I will end with a quote that I love from a character in a film called The Year of Living Dangerously, which was about Indonesia. And the character is Billy Kwan, a Chinese-Australian journalist who said something really important, which is that really all you can do is add your light to the sum of light. So let's do that today and every day, and maybe we'll see some of the changes we need. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Binon. So our next speaker is Professor Chiapei Chou, who is executive, sorry about that, who is Executive Vice President at National Taiwan University. Professor Chou has served as the National Taiwan more than 30 years in various roles since obtaining her PhD from the University of Texas, Austin. Her work as a teacher scholar in the field of civil and transport engineering has been recognized through the prestigious Ministry of Education. Sorry, I think I could hear, may I ask the audience to be muted? Okay, sorry about that. And so going back, so Professor Chou has been recognized through the prestigious Ministry of Education Excellent Teacher Award, 2 national CNS specifications, and other accolades. Professor Chou also spent 5 years in the US as a technology diplomat serving as the director of the Science and Technology Division at the Taipei Economic and Cultural Office. That was in Houston, and later on at the Taipei Economic and Cultural Representative Office in Washington, D.C., where she successfully built research ties between the US and Taiwan. As EVP, Professor Chou has been leading the internationalization efforts of NTU by promoting institutional partnerships, bilingual education, student mobility, and the international college. So in 2020, Professor Chou founded the Women in STEM Society. This is the first of its kind at NTU, and the aim was to unite and connect female faculty members. So let us now give the stage to Professor Chou.
Thank you, Darrelli, for your very kind introduction. Good morning, afternoon, and evening to all the friends from all over the world. I'm Chiapei, the Executive Vice President of National Taiwan University, and I'm very happy to meet all of you here on this special day. As mentioned by Darrelli, I'm trained in civil engineering, focusing on airport and highway engineering. It is, of course, a man-dominated field. For my first 2 decades of teaching, there were only 2 women out of 55 faculty members in my department. However, to be honest, I have never felt that being a woman has any effect on my professional life. It was when I started teaching that I realized the advantage of being a woman. Maybe because I'm a mother of 2. In the classroom, I'm very attentive to my students' learning needs. I became very popular with students and received a great reputation for my teaching. I won the NTU Outstanding Teacher Award for 4 times, and I also won the National Excellent Teachers Award from the Ministry of Education, which is only given to 10 professors for the whole country per year. My first administrative position work was the Central Office for Students Affairs. Later, I became the Vice President of International Affairs. Both positions taught me how to listen and collaborate well with others. After that, I was invited by the Ministry of Science and Technology to serve as Director of Science and Technology in the United States Diplomatic Office between 2011 and 2016. I was the first female in that leadership position. There, I found that the feminine relational skills were very useful too. By being patient, sincere, and attentive to details, I was able to facilitate many important technology collaborations between the United States and Taiwan, such as the project between Taiwan National Space Center, NASA, Air Force, and the Environmental Protection Agencies, and the Extreme Weather Project with the US National Science Foundation and the Taiwan Ministry of Science and Technology. I believe these achievements were partly due to my feminine approach of caring about the needs of every party, which ensures win-win collaboration. Currently, I'm Executive Vice President of NTU. Again, the first female in this position. My motherly instincts also came into play again in 2 particular events. One is to welcome Hong Kong University students to study free in NTU for a month, when most Hong Kong universities closed down in early November 2019 due to the protest movements. I remember thinking how helpless the students must have felt having their semester end early and suddenly. We raised funds in Taiwan, and to support their expenses, more than 400 students come from Hong Kong enroll into this program. Another event was the COVID-19 outbreak. In 2020, many international students around the world were asked to return their home countries. At that time, the COVID situation in Taiwan wasn't too bad, and we still have regular in-person classes. That is why we set up another special visiting student program for these returning Taiwanese students who don't have regular university lives and have to take their online courses at night or even past midnight. We welcome them to register as visiting students at NTU. They take courses and participate in campus life. We even work with the partner universities to customize such programs for their students. This program has been ongoing since the early 2020, with around 200 students enrolled at the peak lockdown. I got the ideas for this program for Hong Kong and the COVID-19 affected students because I was able to deeply emphasize thinking about the students like a mother would. Being a woman gives me great idea in the workplace. One lesson did I learn in the journey? In the beginning, as an engineer, I didn't want to highlight myself as a woman engineer. I didn't want my gender to be a factor for any special treatment. However, over the years, I saw myself facing more challenges and stresses than my male colleagues, especially when in administrative positions. I also learned that womanly instincts can be so valuable in the workplace. Women often can think of an issue in a different way than men, and sometimes can soften difficult problems. Now I think it should be more thoughtful and considerate toward the women in the workplace, because women do face more difficulties. It is why I founded the Women in STEM Society for the female faculty members of NTU last year. The society provides much needed support network for the female faculty of our campus. Lastly, I really appreciate the APWiL for giving me this opportunity to share with you some of my journey. Thank you for listening, and a happy International Women's Day. I hope our discussion later will be very fruitful. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Chou, for that very inspiring sharing. And now we move on to our third speaker. Our final speaker is Dr. Marion Mahat. She is Senior Research Fellow at the University of Melbourne, where I'm also from. Dr. Mahat has more than 20 years of professional and academic experience spanning several universities, the Australian federal and local governments, as well as the private and school sectors. Her research focuses on learning environments with an emphasis on co-designing curriculum and pedagogy, teacher-led inquiry, and professional development of teachers across different educational contexts. She has authored over 50 peer-reviewed journal articles, book chapters, and reports, and a recipient or co-recipient of over 1.5 million Australian dollars in external research funding. She leads a series of micro-credentials on leading change in learning environments, and she's also very passionate about building capacity and capability of academic staff at universities. In addition to her research, leadership and learning environments, she is series editor of the Surviving and Thriving in Academia and book editor of Achieving Academic Promotion and Women Thriving in Academia, published by Emerald. So let us now hear from Dr. Marian Mahad.
Thanks, Darrelli, and good morning, afternoon, and evening to all those present today from wherever you are. I would like to begin by acknowledging the Wurundjeri people who are the traditional owners of the land that I'm standing on, that is APWiL, Melbourne. I would like to pay respects to the elders, both past and present, of the Kulin Nation, and extend that respect to other Indigenous present today. Thank you to the Association of Pacific Rim Universities APWiL program for inviting me today. I'm honored and humbled to be amongst a panel of amazing women on International Women's Day. So I wanted to begin by telling a little bit about myself. I am a Senior Research Fellow at the Melbourne Graduate School of Education at the University of Melbourne. I have more than 20 years experience in higher education. However, my academic identity has evolved over the last 20 years. I started as a research administrator at Monash University in 2000, and I have had success in leading administrative and research teams and projects, including in the office of the Senior Deputy Vice Chancellor, as well as in the public sector. I started my PhD late in my career, having been awarded a double scholarship from the Australian government, as well as from the University of Melbourne. I completed my PhD in less than 3 years with no amendments, and was promoted to Senior Research Fellow within a year of completing my PhD. Today, I continue my academic work focusing on research in learning environments. This, however, is the public me. The not public me is the person that not many people know. Not many people know that I started a PhD in 2002. I withdrew from the PhD after baby number 1, and when we decided to move interstate to follow my husband's career at that point of time. I took a sabbatical from professional work, had a miscarriage, and baby number 2. In 2011, I decided to go back to professional work, and about 5 weeks into my new job, we decided to return to Melbourne, again to follow my husband's career. My marriage broke down in 2013. My mom was diagnosed with brain tumor in 2016, and my dad with pancreatic cancer in 2019. Late last year, in the height of the COVID-19 pandemic, my 11-year-old experienced anxiety and mental health issues. Sorry, this is a real me, the me that not too many people know. I wanted to tell you this side of me because I wanted to put my experience into context. I did not have a traditional academic career, and like most people, men and women alike, have struggled to balance work and life at different times in my life. But as shared by our co-chairs of APWiL, Professor Joanna Regalska and Dr. Sabrina Lin, in a recent article on Nikkei Asia, the COVID pandemic has made a bad situation even worse for women academics. So today I'm sharing with you a story of a time when I influenced or affected change, highlighting the skills I use and the lessons I have learned. So about a year after I completed my PhD, I was at a conference in San Antonio, United States, when I sat down to have a cup of coffee after a long day of presentations. I was jet-lagged, tired, and grumpy. There was another lady sitting there, and we started talking. I told her about the trials and tribulations of being an academic, particularly a woman academic of color. I had recently applied for academic promotion, and although I was successful, the process left me drained and slightly jaded about academia. She said, "Why don't you write about it? I'm sure there are many others in your position who would love to hear about your experiences." Like most academics fresh out of PhD, I was unsure of myself. Who would want to hear about my experiences? It turns out that she was an editor at a publishing house. She urged me to send a book proposal to write my experiences in academia. I came back to Melbourne, thought I had nothing to lose, so I prepared a book proposal and sent it to her. It was rejected. She said, "We don't want a book. We want an entire series dedicated to academics' experience in higher education." I was flattered, but at the same time felt that I was out of my comfort zone. My imposter syndrome went on an overdrive. I questioned myself on so many levels before I decided to go ahead with a book series. 5 years and 7 books later, the Surviving and Thriving in Academia book series has provided graduate researchers, early and mid-career academics, a resource for them to gain insights on the inner workings of academia and how to navigate the landscape with confidence. Whilst the book series do take time away from my research and teaching, I see this as a way to give back to academia. The book series provide an opportunity for me to connect with academics around the world, for me to personally gain insights from my own professional learning, but at the same time to build capacity and capability for our next generation of academics. The books in the series may not affect change at the global or institutional level, but hopefully it will affect change at the individual level. If we are to create spaces in academia where we have diverse colleagues and flexible working environments, we have to start within ourselves. Incremental change is like compound interest, which Albert Einstein called the 8th wonder of the world. It doesn't seem like much at first, but it adds up to a mind-boggling amount of change. Several things I learned about this experience. You never know who you're sitting with and talking to. Opportunities might present everywhere, sometimes when you're not looking. Most people like to talk about themselves and their experiences. The people who contribute to the series have unique experiences and have something to share. Always be open to conversations. I want to finish off today with this anecdote. A wise female dean once told me, "One cannot agitate for change and then be unwilling to step up and do the work when change is invited." She also said that saying yes to opportunities, never blindly, but always fearlessly, It's a chance at something with no guarantee of continuation or reward. This is a very crucial point because sometimes opportunities are close-ended and don't lead to anything else. But whether short-term or continuous, opportunities are always a chance to demonstrate competence, the ability to work well with others, to develop plans and follow them, to pivot as needed, and to revise as appropriate. And with that, I thank you and wish you all a happy International Women's Day.
Thank you very much, Marian. So I would like to invite everyone to give our three distinguished panel of panelists a round of applause. So thank you very much for sharing your personal journey, Marian. And I also enjoyed listening to Professor Chou's discussion around her background in being a male-dominated field. And of course, who could not remember what Professor Binon earlier mentioned and how armed conflict has imposed on women and girls. So on this, I would like to invite everyone to reflect and discuss in the different breakout rooms, using a specific scenario, but drawing from the wisdom of nuggets of wisdoms that we have heard from our three speakers earlier. But before I send you out into your own breakout rooms, here are some helpful information. So in each breakout room, we will have a facilitator as well as a mural board to support and assist with the discussion. So in each of those questions, so there will be a scenario that you will read, and then there will be two questions that each breakout room would be addressing in the next 2 to 3 minutes. So you'll be reflecting and writing down your thoughts using the mural board, after which you will engage in a facilitated discussion. So that's how it's organized. And later on, when we come back to the plenary, I would really encourage volunteers to share their experience and sharing within their own breakout rooms. So is there any specific questions that you would like answered? Anyway, I would like to invite a representative from one of the breakout rooms who would be courageous enough to share with the whole group, the insights and ideas that they have gathered from their own discussions. Are there any takers? May I begin?
From the group one, Olivia Penn, Professor Olivia Penn will be our representative. Please.
Hi, I'm Olivia from Group 1. So what we have learned from the speakers, we think that we can take, since we're women and female, and we could take this advantage to chat with other women candidates. We can be more resilient and find strength. We could also find sponsorship and mentorship and ask for external help and tackle issue one at a time. These are the things that we learned from our speakers and from our own experience. We think that we could track and report change. Really track what is the progress, the trend, what is really happening in the institution, whether there is still a huge gender gap, and jump on one-on-one and group meetings with for writing grants or issues as important for them, which is important as well because it increases human-to-human connections, which is much needed in this time. Also host family day in the workplace. It's also important because a lot of times our family don't know what is going on in the workplace and they don't understand why we're so busy. Support, also leverage others for support, and maybe support others with postdoc and research assistant fund. So for scholars who are in senior administrative position, they don't have a lot of time for their research, maybe support them with the postdoc. Then they could also support their research work in the long run. So that's it.
Thank you.
Group.
Yeah, thank you very much, Olivia. We have Serene raising her hand. Serene, let us know which group you belong to, if you remember.
I actually don't remember which group I belong to. I just walked into the room blindly.
Group two. Okay, go for it, Serene.
Thank you so much. What we discussed was the need for us, actually, to quote what Marion said towards the end of her sharing session with us, the need to be fearless, but not blindly so. So that was one of the things that we talked about. And, what we need to do, if we see there is a problem and we see that there are ways and means that we can sort it out, then we need to be fearless. But that fearlessness cannot come on its own. You can't do it on your own. You need to have the buy-in of others along your own, level, perhaps. And even those, all around, if you're fighting for somebody else, then you need the buy-in from them, because you shouldn't be speaking for them otherwise. But you also need the buy-in of your peers who are in a position to help them, so that that collegiality, that collective action, that fearlessness must come together. The other thing that we discussed about was the need for data collection. A lot of the times people just barge in blindly to try and, to have more equitable opportunities for everyone. But often we've discovered that if we go in backed in with data, we go in with a lot of information, it makes the case stronger for everyone. And that data is incredibly important. I think it was Fanny who brought that up, if I'm not mistaken. And one of the other things, the final things we talked about was inclusiveness, and the need. Very often we talk about inclusivity, diversity, but very often there is a rift between international staff, local staff, international students, local students. So there's always that slight distinction between them, where very often, they're minefields for trouble down the road. So, and it's not just gender. Some of them are gendered, but there are others that are, ethnic based, or even, other kinds of different intersections there. So what we talked about was the need for actual inclusivity, policies, practices, structures that need to address this inclusivity, rather than just saying inclusivity or diversity means recruitment. We cannot equate the two. There must be policy structures in place to make sure there's actual inclusiveness involved. So perhaps, Cindy, you want to say something more in case I've forgotten anything? Thank you.
No, I think you've covered it all. One of our members did mention the demand on our time, that especially during the pandemic, it's almost as if, with technology, we are expected to be around, to be available all the time. And that is really, that could really adversely affect our work-life balance. So that's a major challenge. But we also have a response that you have to be firm. You have to say that I cannot do three meetings on 3 devices at the same time. You will have to tell people around you that don't do that.
Or just have one device, right? Yeah, thank you very much, group 2. Maybe we can hear from 1 or 2 more groups. So we have Mahar raising her hand. You want to go, Mahar?
Yes, thank you very much. I'm from room 4. And we have a very good discussion, only we run out of time. So first of all, learning from the speakers, we all feel that the speakers gave us very good example of their struggles through their career development. So to help, we all feel that we should help all of our women colleagues to build their networks and help them navigate through the work-life balance and develop trust among us. One point that we spend quite a bit of time talking about is that we must help and try to amplify the voices of women so that our voices will be heard. Several of us gave the example of, if you just look at pictures of websites of various universities, so many times you will see a dominating appearance of male colleagues, but you have to spot the women among a big crowd of group photo of men. So obviously we really have to try to sort of increase the awareness of this gender balance. Now, regarding the pandemic and many of the work quality for both men and women, we had a very interesting discussion about being honest. First of all, we are in the face of the pandemic. We should be honest about the impact of the pandemic on us, on both men and women. And just, we don't need to shy about it, shy from it. We have Marian in our group, so of course we heard her very moving story about talking about experiences, as well as sometimes we may be worried about exposing our weakness among our colleagues. So again, we discussed this a bit, and we feel that to be authentic, to be honest about our experience, especially those who are in the leadership position, is very important. So to lead by examples, to lead by role model, this is very much so for both our male and female colleagues. So perhaps for those women leaders who are already in a senior position, if we could make use of opportunities to not to shy away from being honest of the struggles or weaknesses and so on, then we'll be able to sort of set an example and also support those other junior colleagues to be able to step up. As for skills and strengths, I think that all of us agree that we do demonstrate a lot of resilience at difficult times. And to move forward, we feel that we should be sensitive to the need of our women colleagues. We need to try as far as possible, nominate as many women as possible to the leadership position. We should try to support our colleagues so that our women colleagues will be able to step up. I have a little bit of experience in these regards, is that many of my male colleagues are in a hurry when it comes to promotion and when it comes to opportunities. And it doesn't matter whether they are ready or not, but they will be in a hurry to put themselves up. And many of our women colleagues are very, very serious. They do not put themselves up until they really are 100% sure that they will get it. But that's not necessarily the case. So we should just encourage our colleagues to step up and really boost the pipeline for women leadership. So I think these are the points that our group have discussed. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mehar. We have about a few seconds to go before we move to the next part of this program. So
I have a brief introduction of not program. I am volunteering. This is Lei Hong Hee. Do we have time?
Actually, we don't have time anymore. Chelsea, do we have any time? A few, like a minute or two?
Yes, I think if we can keep it short, we can make time.
Okay. Sorry. I'm also keeping time on my side. So yeah, Li Hong, please go ahead.
Yes. So I, besides the stem cell therapy, I'm also a volunteer of a Global Mom Initiative, which the short name is GMI. Mm-hmm. This is a nonprofit and a volunteer program which is run initiative for speak out for all the moms all over the world. As the former speaker said, female didn't get really, equal rights or gender equality in job or even in family. So what we are doing is trying to bring the awareness that women is important. Women sacrifice a lot. Women do a lot. Women is brilliant. So so the main facility or our main office is in mainland China, Beijing, but also we are spreading out to all over the world. I'm in charge of, I'm volunteer of like doing the American part. So I would like to invite anyone to get to know more about us. So if anyone want to speak out like for your story or your story with your mom, you're more than welcome, because I want to let the whole world to get to know more and more about female.
Thank you, Li Hong.
Yeah.
So I think it would be good if you could share with us the link to the information that you have shared with us. That would be great. So without further ado, thank you very much for sharing. Thank you for those who volunteered from the breakout rooms. It was really nice hearing from all of you. And now I would like to pass on to Sabrina for the closing remarks.
Thank you so much, Darrelli, for moderating the discussion today. And thank you so much to Professor Bennoune, Professor Chou, and Dr. Mahat for joining us and sharing very inspiring as well as heartfelt stories and your personal journey. And of course, thank you to our breakout facilitators, as well as those who have shared, and of course to our both Kimberly and Chelsea, without whom this workshop would not have happened at all. So I just want to close with a quick update to the mentoring program participants. Beginning of April, we're going to be reaching out that you complete the mid-year progress assessment. So it's a good time to schedule meetings with your mentor or mentee in March if you haven't done so already. We do have some informal, we have one informal networking opportunity with breakout rooms on Zoom at the end of April, on April 26th. And this is a good opportunity to do what you guys have shared just now around the importance of networking and sharing and amplifying our voices by getting to know and building and expanding our networks. And then finally, please save the date for our June seminar on June 15th from 6 to 7:30, or June 16th from 9 to 10:30, depending on time zone, and more details coming soon. I hope you have a good rest of the day and rest of the week, and good evening and good morning.